The Abbasids. The Abbasids claimed legitimacy as the descendants of Muhammad's uncle, Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib. The Abbasids commanded initial endorsement from the Shia, upholding their belief that the leader of the Ummah must be a relative of Muhammad, though the Abbasids renounced their Shia beliefs soon after coming to power, infuriating their Shia supporters. They also appealed to the disenfranchised non-Arab Muslims in the empire, and to Muslims who objected to the Umayyads' extravagant imperial ways and authoritarian rule. When the Umayyad dynasty was overthrown in 750, following a series of revolts, the new caliph attempted to destroy the entire Umayyad clan. Many of the Umayyads were massacred during a banquet, while others were chased down. A single Umayyad prince escaped death by fleeing to North Africa and then to Al-Andalus, where he established the Umayyad Emirate of Cordoba in 756. So he ran to Spain. You can see Cordoba in this map here at the far left. Little dot in Spain, just north of the yellow. The height of the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad is considered a golden age for Muslims in terms of artistic, scientific, and mathematical achievements made in this time. Trade was revived along the Silk Road, bringing with it a blend of cultures and a free flow of ideas. The Indian system of numbers, which included zero as a placeholder, was adopted in Baghdad, though translations of mathematical texts and through the translation of mathematical texts and was later transported to European lands, where the numbers came known as Arabic numerals. The Abbasids made great strides in the fields of geometry, trigonometry. The word algebra comes from the title of a treaty by 9th century Baghdad mathematician Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, rules of reintegration and reduction, or simply algebra, meaning reunion of broken parts. Abbasid intellectuals, among whom were Muslims, Christians, Jews, and others, also excelled in the fields of astronomy, medicine, cartography, and others. The astrolabe, an ancient instrument used to determine the time of day and night, was adapted by the Muslims through translations of ancient Greek texts and was improved to help accurately ascertain prayer times and the direction of Mecca from different locations. Astrolabes, inscribed in Arabic, in turn made their way to Europe through Spain and became essentially popular in the 15th and 16th centuries as an astronomical education tool. In the field of medicine, scholars cultivated a greater understanding of anatomy and disease. One of the Abbasids' most famous scientists, known by his Latinized name Avicenna in 980 to 1037, wrote hundreds of books on philosophy and medicine, including a 14-volume canon of medicine, which was used as a standard medical text in Europe for 700 years, earning him the nomenclature the father of modern science and medicine. The blending of cultures influenced literature and language, infusing Persian words and literary style with that of Arabic. An example is the poetic epic 1001 Nights, a series of tales recited by the legendary queen Shishrazad to keep her husband from executing her. Among the stories are Sinbad the Sailor and Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. During this time, moreover, Muslim religious scholars collected orally transmitted accounts of Muhammad's life and words, compiled them into collections, the Hadith, and created an authoritative body of Islamic law, Sharia. Although not stated in the Quran, Muslims argue that only God can create life and that the artistic representation of people or animals challenges his omnipotent power. Images of living creatures could also be seen as a form of idolatry, which the Quran strictly forbids. Given this view, Muslims developed a unique decorative style involving geometric patterns and calligraphy to express themselves artistically. Symmetrical, repeated geometric shapes, called arabesque design, are employed to invoke the infinite nature of God. The art of Arabic calligraphy is greatly respected even in non Arabic speaking countries because it is the language of the Quran. The Hadith. The words Muhammad recited as revealed text were considered part of the Quran. Lest the words of God be confused with those of Muhammad himself, Muhammad initially forbade his followers to write down his personal sayings until the sanctity of the Quran was clearly established. When the prohibition was lifted, his companions meticulously took notes of Muhammad's activities, his lessons, his instructions, and his way of living. These personal sayings and actions were compiled into books of hadith narrations, kept separate from the Quran. After Muhammad's death, religious scholars began to compile information about Muhammad's life. Hadith were passed down orally from generation to generation by those who had contact with Muhammad. Reports and legends were gathered from all over the Muslim world and exhaustively analyzed for authenticity. The most famous collector, for instance, collected over 600,000 hadith, but included only 2,206 in his official book because he could not prove the others were genuine. Scholarly debate continues in the Muslim community over the authenticity of the various hadith. Some of the most dependable hadith are observed, while others are excluded by some Muslims. A very small percentage of believers dismiss all the hadith, deeming them unreliable or at worst fabricated texts. So the hadith is just the sayings of Muhammad that they scribbled down, little things he said. Sunnah literally means custom, but refers specifically to the way of life of Muhammad. While hadith are narrations about his life, the Sunnah, from which the word Sunni is derived, represents Muhammad's living example, including the things he allowed or condoned and the things he himself disapproved of or refrained from doing. In addition to the five pillars of Islam, pious Muslims are encouraged to model their actions after the customary practice of Muhammad. Through the Sunnah also includes practices that only applied to him or were specific to that time period or location, like the way he dressed or the marriage customs. Sharia law. The body of Islamic law steadily developed from the time of Muhammad's death and became organized into the Abbasid period. By carefully examining the holy books in Islam, the Quran, Hadith, the Sunnah, religious scholars were able to formulate laws that govern every aspect of a Muslim's life, from family law to rules regarding Islamic rituals, jurisprudence, business practices, governance, and so on. They called Sharia, or the way. When there was not explicit textual basis for a rule, standard sources were supplemented by laws determined by popular consensus, ijma, and analogies, comparing the matters to similar situations in the past. This continues in the modern period, with issues such as abortion, cryogenics, organ donation, and so on. The development of Sharia underpinned the growing sense of Sunni orthodoxy while elevating the status of religious scholars, the ulama. As the Muslim place of worship, the mosque, from the Arabic word masjid, meaning place of prostration, serves as a focal point for the Muslim community. Before Islam, the area around the Kaaba was called the Masjid, but the model for future Islamic mosques was the one constructed in Medina in 622 by Muhammad. Like all future masjids, the Quba Mosque in Medina was fitted with a niche in the direction of the prayer, first facing Jerusalem and then later toward Mecca, and surrounded by a garden area. Early mosques, often built in vacated churches, which the Muslims believed were holy, served as symbols of Muslim dominance. All mosques share the same important elements. The mihrab, a niche in the inside wall of the mosque indicating the direction of prayer. The qibla was the direction of prayer. The minbar, a pulpit from where the Friday sermon is delivered, and a fountain for worshippers to perform their ritual washing for prayer. In the early 8th century, towers were built next to the mosques for use by the muezzins, who called the faithful to prayer. These minarets, towers, as they were called, were probably inspired by Christian church steeples in Syria and further signaled the presence of a Muslim community in the region. Mosques are frequently adorned with domes, verses from the Quran in Arabic script, and elaborate arabesque designs. After escaping his death at the hands of the Abbasids, the Umayyad exile Abd al-Rahman established himself as the emir of Cordoba in 756. Over the next 30 years, he established Umayyad authority over the whole Iberian Peninsula, while his successors turned Cordoba into the most prosperous city in Europe, aside from Constantinople. Cordoba became a cultural center in the region with libraries and universities that attracted scholars from all over the world, greatly influencing medieval Western Europe. Artistically, Muslim architecture blended with Spanish designs, producing a unique style that was unmatched. By and large, Christians and Jews were treated fairly by the Caliphate. In fact, Spanish Jews experienced a golden age of Judaism while living under their Muslim overlords. The Sephardic Jews are what the Jews in Spain were called. A large, influential, and flourishing Jewish community had developed for centuries under the Muslims in Al-Andalus on the Iberian Peninsula, so modern-day Spain and Portugal. Jewish traditions in these communities melded with the Muslim practices in the Arabic language, creating a unique form of Judaism practiced by the Spanish Jews. Arabic and Hebrew were both used for prayers in this community, and the Jews spoke their own Judo-Spanish language called Ladino. The 400-year golden age of Judaism in Spain ended when the Christians conquered Toledo in 1085 and most of the peninsula by the mid-13th century. In order to homogenize the population under a single faith, the Christians conducted mass conversions of Jews and Muslims. The Jewish converts were later accused of practicing Judaism in secret and raising their children according to Jewish custom. They were called dirty Christians. They were tortured or killed during the 15th century Spanish Inquisition. And in 1492, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, expelled all the Jews who refused to convert to Christianity. The Spanish Jews, once seen as the elite among Jews, resettled in Muslim countries in the Ottoman Empire or joined fellow Jews in other parts of Europe. Some even came to the New World. Architecture. In Al-Andalus, under Muslim rule, developed a unique style that blended Spanish and Muslim styles, still visible in Spain today. In the north of the peninsula, Muslims living under Christian rule created the Mudéjar style of architecture, incorporating geometric shapes like the arabesque and high rounded arches characterized by the use of brick as the main material. Although the Abbasid caliphs nominally maintained their positions as ultimate political leaders until 1258, the Abbasid Caliphate was a truncated shell by the time the Crusaders arrived in Jerusalem in 1095. The Abbasid subjects were becoming increasingly frustrated with high taxes and breakaway autonomous kingdoms like the Umayyads in Spain, the Fatimids in Egypt, the Buyids in Persia. Oof, so many autonomous kingdoms breaking away. They competed with the Abbasid caliphs for authority over the Islamic community. The Abbasids had appointed a cadre of governors or emirs to help govern the vast empire, but many of them, too, had dynastic ambitions and carved out their own kingdoms in Afghanistan, northern India, and other parts of the empire. In order to keep them in line, the Abbasids created an army of Turkic slaves, Mamluks, meaning owned in Arabic, who soon became powerful enough to command royal authority. With the Muslim lands divided into spheres of competing influence, the Islamic community had become powerless against the Crusaders in the 11th century and the Mongol invasions of the 13th century. In 1258, the Mongols under Hulag Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, sacked Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasids, and killed the caliph. Abbasid rulers continued to maintain power for nearly 2 more centuries, after a member of the 37th caliph's family escaped to Cairo, where he was recognized as caliph under the rule of the Mamluks of Egypt. The Cairo line of the Abbasids ended with the Ottoman conquest of Egypt in 1517. These are the discussion questions for today's lecture.